Typically, when you're coming in on a descent to land, is it mainly autopilot controlled or is it pilot controlled?
It depends. So the airplane I fly, the Boeing 767, has the ability to auto land. With that being said, there's limitations to the auto land function. Crosswind being one of them. If the crosswind is too much, the auto land is not. You're not allowed to use auto land.
Welcome to Harry Handles It, a podcast where we dive into the world of personal growth, success strategies, and everything in between. I'm your host, Harry Nalbandyan, and today we're going to chat with an incredible guest who has some amazing insights to share. Remember, no matter what life throws your way, I'm here to help you handle it. So let's get started.
Welcome to the Harry Handles It podcast. Today we've got pilot Pete on. Pete, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what you do and who you are?
Sure. My name is Peter. Some of my friends call me Pilot Pete. I am by profession a commercial airline pilot for a major U.S. airline. I've been flying for about 16 years now, professionally for about 13 of those years. I've flown over 7,000 hours. I currently fly the Boeing 767 all around the world. And flying is not only my profession, but also a passion of mine. I enjoy sharing aviation with aspiring aviators, people who are coming through the ranks, who want to make flying part of their life. And I enjoy spreading that information, sharing kind of what it's like to be an airline pilot. I create content on the side, whether it's traveling or airline pilot day in the life, or showing people that, hey, you can still work out, have relationships, and do a lot more than just fly planes. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell, and excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. One thing that surprised me as a guy who really had no background in aviation, other than I wanted to fly an airplane because it's one of the coolest things you can do. One thing that surprised me was how in the pilot community, how pilots are trained. So it's peer-to-peer training, with a CFI. And that was kind of a surprise to me. Did you have any thoughts about how that training occurs?
I don't think I knew. I was none the wiser. I got into flying. My grandfather and my dad both are private pilots. Never flew with them, but they always kind of talked about it when we were together. Something that was kind of, I think, a seed planted in the back of my head when I was younger. I went to college just to go to college. I'm an Arizona State alumni. And I had no idea that they even had a flying program when I went out there. I just went out there to have a good time, be in the warm weather, go to some fun football games. And then my sophomore year of college, I didn't really click with any subject or any classes really. And I saw that we had an aviation program. I decided to give it a shot. Absolutely loved it. And my career kind of took off from there, pun intended. But as far as the peers and people, how you kind of train, that's all I knew. I just went to the school to see what it was like. I saw that the upperclassmen were teaching the the freshmen, the sophomores, and the juniors, and I just kind of figured, okay, this is how it works. So it's interesting, though, that you said that, because it's something I've never really thought about. But when you think about it, and it is kind of interesting, there's not really, there is oversight because you need your certificate, and like you mentioned, you need your CFI in order to train people. But at the end of the day, it is peer-to-peer, and that's kind of a unique scenario, and especially from where you can take it. You have mentioned, I'm sure your viewers know, private pilot, working on your instrument. If you work hard enough and want to make it a career, you could be flying Boeing 747s in a couple years. And to get there, it's by peer instruction. So a pretty unique path to get to bigger and faster airplanes.
Yeah. To me, it was a lot similar. I also trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there's a lot of peer-to-peer teaching and coaching involved in that. And I kind of felt it was the same way with learning how to fly. You're sitting on the right seat is your instructor, and you're kind of trusting a lot of what they say while you're doing and going through the notions, doing your procedures. And generally with the training, I feel like at least in the aviation community, the training philosophy is pretty strong. Most pilots I know always want to get better. They're always continuously learning, trying to refine and hone their skills, because at the end of the day, when something does happen, you're defaulting to your muscle memory and how well you're trained in circumstances like that. So for me, it was kind of refreshing to see that approach and finding the right instructor. I'm sure you've gone through, a number of them going through the ranks, but finding the right instructor is pretty key. They can have a big lasting impact on your aviation kind of philosophy and your progression through the ranks.
Absolutely, yeah. You said it great. People ask me all the time, whether it's via DMs or YouTube comments, whatever it may be. Pete, what flight school should I go to? What flight school should I go to? What flight school I should go to? There is no such thing as a good flight school. There's only such good things as good flight instructors. So it's kind of, I tell people it's like going to high school, right? You have teachers that you remember that clicked with you, that their teaching format and their style really resonated with you as a student. It's the same in flying. There could be an instructor out there that has 100% pass rate, meaning they've had 50 students, 50 have passed. You go up with them for 5 lessons and you can't stand them, whether they're too lenient or too aggressive, whatever it may be. It's teaching styles that don't always mesh with people. Human beings are human beings. We're not always going to get along with everyone that we encounter. So absolutely, yeah, it's having that core instructor is critical. I was fortunate enough to have pretty awesome instructors throughout my beginning stages, and then probably the biggest person for me that really honed in my skills, my philosophy, like you mentioned, was I call it my first big boy job. I was flying corporate jets, private aviation all around North America, the Caribbean, and that captain I flew with, who we're still good friends to this day. He was an older gentleman, had flown at the airlines before, but he really taught me how to not only be a pilot, but be a professional, and the things that are crucial in flying, the things that you really need to pay attention to, and the things that aren't that big of a deal, kind of let it go. And I don't mean safety or anything like that. I just mean, I work with so many different personalities, and people get worked up over little things like, oh, why is this flight attendant or why is this luggage personnel taken? It's like, hey, everyone's got a job to do. Focus on what you can control. And he did a really good job instilling that into me. And I'm grateful for his mentorship, his friendship, and kind of like you said, that instructor and the people you learn from in this crazy world of flying can end up playing a major role in your success.
What you learned how to fly in Arizona? That's where your training was?
I actually went back before I joined the Arizona State University flight program. I came back to New Jersey, where I'm born and raised. A little small airport, Lincoln Park, New Jersey. Shout out November 07. Small, like 1,800 foot by 40 foot strip. I learned at 172. I got my private there over the summer going into my sophomore year. So I busted my tail off flying 4 or 5 days a week and got my private in about 2.5 months, and then joined the flight program out in Arizona and started doing additional training out there.
Nice. I did my training at a Van Nuys General Aviation Airport. And
Busy.
the instructors, what was that?
Busy airport.
Very. So I know no different, right? That's the environment I learned in, and that's where I fly. And the air traffic controllers are incredible. At least in that area that I've flown, to control
Definitely.
that volume of traffic. I mean, I've been in the air sometimes, and it's just, you try to get on the radio, but it's one air traffic controller, Boeing, go this way, Heavy, go this way, you go that way. And maybe for 2 minutes, the radios are jammed of just instructions going out left and right. And these pilots are professionals. They follow instructions and they get it done. And that flow is able to get in through all those airports, which is pretty wild sometimes.
Oh, trust me. There's pros and cons to everything in life, but when it comes to flight training specifically, I learned at a non-control airport. For those people who don't know what that means, it means non-towered. There's no air traffic control. So my communications for non-controlled towers is excellent, right? I know how to handle that. However, the con side of that is when I flew into Caldwell, Morristown, Teterboro, I had no idea what was going on because I was so taken aback by the radio communications. A pro side of where I learned was the runway I landed at, like I mentioned, was 1,800 feet long. That's a short runway. I would go out to Arizona. The flight program was out of Willie Mesa Gateway. Those runways were 12,000 feet. So when we went to do short field landings, we'd go to places, not Scottsdale, we'd go like Chandler and other of these places, and they would be like 28, or they'd be like 4,000 feet long, and my instructors would be like, okay, this is a short field landing. I'm like, no, it's not. This is double what I'm learning at. But to go back to your point of like the air traffic control and learning in that environment, yeah, they're incredible. Air traffic controllers, in my opinion, have a much harder job than what I do. I really believe that. Those men and women are absolute professionals. I know there have been some scrutiny, whether it's in the news or in politics or whatever, but those men and women are incredible at their craft. As you can probably tell, I'm a New York-based guy, Newark, LaGuardia. I got a JFK chart over there.
Awesome.
So born and raised in the New York area, this is my home. This is where I fly in and out of. LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark are my bread and butter. Those men and women on the ground, in the tower, TRACON, which is the approach and departure control center, are unbelievable. You had mentioned it in Van Nuys. They're dealing with Teterboro, White Plains, all those major airports, the small airports in Morristown, the busiest corporate airport in the world, some of the busiest major airports in the world. And they do an incredible job where I can only be like, wow, I just turned my autopilot to 5,000 feet and descended and landed. Like, that was easy compared to what they had to do. So, no, kudos to the air traffic controllers all around the country and the world, because those men and women are top notch.
Yeah, big time. I know there's, in the news, especially recently, there's been some discussion about the technology that's relied on by ATC or the FAA to control some of this traffic being old. I don't exactly know what technology goes into that, but can you talk a little bit about that?
I don't know too much about the technology myself. I know it's been upgraded a little bit from like the 60s and 70s, but not as much as I think the technology that exists they have their hands on, if that makes sense. So I have a good friend. He works at the Myrtle Beach Airport. He does air traffic control there, so he's given me a tour, and I've kind of seen the hands-on, and it's incredible stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think the technology can definitely be advanced, especially in 2025. I think it comes down to, and again, I'm not get into like political environment, but I think funding, is always kind of like the big not elephant in the room, but that's always kind of the big hurdle to cross, right? Every department, education, aviation, transportation, they all want billions and millions of dollars. I get it, stuff's expensive. I don't know where the money comes from. I know I pay a boatload of taxes, but it's not going to cover a whole new air traffic control system. But yeah, I mean, based on the research I've done, the news I've watched and read, and my peers and some of the professionals that I work with in air traffic control definitely seem, some of them seem like, I don't want to say overwhelmed, more so just like they could use, whether it's increased systems or more people on the payroll or whatever it is, to kind of make their jobs a little bit less stressful. Because I don't make this up. I mean, the data's out there. It's considered one of the top 3 most stressful jobs. And the flunk out rate for people who get into air traffic control, I believe you have to go to Oklahoma City, the headquarters of FAA, to start your training. The flunk out rate is incredibly high because of how difficult it is and the stress. People are like, I'm not doing this for the rest of my career. So again, kudos to those men and women in our air traffic control system. They are the best in my opinion.
Yeah, it's not an easy job at all. Recently, the Delta accident that's been on the news with the rollover. First of all, kudos to the crew for getting everybody out of there almost unharmed. But what a wild experience to be on that kind of a ride. Have you had any close calls? Not like that, but just generally, were you able to abate the risk of the situation, get everybody home safely, and nobody knew any different?
Yeah, I mean, I've had 2 kind of memorable incidents in my career. One was I was flying corporate. We were taking out of Eagle, Colorado, direct to Teterboro, and like climbing through 30,000 feet. Our pressurization controller malfunction, so the mask dropped down. We had to put on our emergency oxygen masks. The procedures in the aviation world is to do an emergency descent because you don't know what's going on, you don't know what's wrong, you don't have unlimited oxygen up there. So the goal is to get down as quickly and as safely as possible. The next question I always get asked is, we ended up diverting to Denver International, landing without incident. The question I always get asked next is, was it scary, all that kind of stuff? And the answer is not because I'm a big macho man. Trust me, I'm the biggest baby there is in the world. I can promise you that. I get scared over little things. But it wasn't scary because your training really does kick in. I mean, at that point, I probably had 6 years of flying experience. Emergency descents are practiced for every type rating. A type rating is a specific license you need to fly a specific jet. So that time I was flying a Hawker 800 corporate business jet, about a 6 to 10 person business jet, depending on the configuration. And anyway, yeah, the training just kicked in. I was flying with another credible and experienced pilot. We did our procedures and landed without incident. Obviously, the passengers knew because we landed somewhere else. The oxygen mask came down. I think I got a little like, I won't say shaky, but definitely, oh boy, when we were finally at the hotel in Denver, that adrenaline kind of wears off and you start to get a little bit of more awareness of what exactly happened. That was the first one. And then the second one, I was a captain at my old airline flying an MD-88 or MD-80 from Vegas to Reno, California. And about 100 miles from the airport in Reno, we lost all of our electrical systems. So our PFD, our primary flight display, our ND, our navigation display, it all went black. And we had to rely on a compass, and it's worth Googling in my opinion, but the MD-80 is an incredible machine. It's a POS as well. The compass is actually located behind the pilot, so you have to flip up a mirror on the dashboard to look at it. It's like the most ridiculous. I think they
That's
built
wild.
the airplane and just were like, oh shoot, we need a compass in this airplane.
Forgot.
So like, okay, we'll put it behind the pilots who you obviously can't fly and look behind you at the same time. So they have this little like vanity mirror that you could buy at CVS for $1.50, and you flip it up and you literally read the compass headings with a mirror. Fortunately, it was VFR, which means visual flight rules, so I could see Reno literally 80 miles out. We told air traffic control as per his procedure. My first officer did an amazing job running the checklist, doing everything. At one point, though, for those who haven't been to Reno, it's a very high terrain, mountainous airport, high altitude. You don't really want to mess around. So I said, hey, at one point, put the checklist away. Let's just focus on getting the airplane on the ground. That's all I care about at this point. Luckily, there's backup systems on every airplane, but especially for airliners. So our gear came down, our flaps worked, and we landed without incident. The passengers were none the wiser, and we taxied to the gate. The passengers getting on the plane to go back to Vegas. They knew something was wrong because they had an 8-hour delay while maintenance came out and tried to fix the airplane. But those are the two most kind of memorable situations. And again, training kicks in. I don't want to say it's what you like. I don't want this to be out of context. It's not like we want this to happen as pilots. We want easy flights, right? Any person in the world that I know, especially people who are capitalists, work less, make more, right? That's the goal. I don't want to be working all these emergencies to make my hourly rate. I want to just get to the destination. But when they do happen, especially when you accomplish them successfully and the outcome is successful, you're kind of a little bit more proud that day to, wear the uniform and have the wings and be like, look, I earned this. This is why they pay me what they pay me in order to. That day I had 186 people I was responsible for, and every single one went home for dinner that day. It was no big deal, and that was definitely one of the more memorable situations.
Well done. I mean, that probably happens more often than people know, and it's because of the training that that professional pilots have and they fall back on, that allows people to go home on a regular, routine basis safely with aviation.
Definitely. And something to piggyback on, and this will be good for you too, Harry, is like you've gotten your private, so you did your solo cross countries and your solos. There were times where you were like, where am I? What's going on? You got nervous. You got sweaty palms. We all have. My first solo, the CFI got out. I did the first landing, second landing, third landing. I had to do a go around because I was too fat and I started bugging out. I go, what's going on? I didn't expect to have to do a go around. So I started freaking out. But you rely on that training and that, kind of that like second nature of what you've been taught leading up to that point. So I've been in those situations before. Yeah, maybe I wasn't flying 186 people, but I had the ability to calm those nerves and successfully land my 172 back at Lincoln Park. Was probably like 8 years the previous, right? So that same mechanism that's in my brain and in my body kicked in that day to be like, hey, everything's going to be fine, and we're going to get these people, including myself, on the ground safely. And that's exactly what happened. So I really think all those experiences, I remember, I'm sure it happened to you on your cross-country solo, you're looking at your chart, you're like, is that the right golf course? Is that the highway I'm supposed to be following? Holy crap, where am I? And you had those 5 seconds or 5 minutes of like, what's going on? But look, every single time you made it successfully. And it's the same thing for almost every single flight out there.
Big time. I'll never forget this. I had just gotten my PPL and I'd reserved. So I learned. I've got my certificate in a Cirrus. So throughout my training, it's just been a panel. And so I'm in there. I got my PPL. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do a nice hour and a half flight, go grab some lunch and come back. And I'm sitting in the plane. I'm about to take off, and as I rotate, I'm looking at the engine parameters, and I see that the oil pressure is in the yellow, dips into the red, and then heart rate immediately spikes up. You're like, all right, I'm on takeoff. I don't have time to turn around. What's next if this goes to zero, right? That's what you think about. And I'll never forget it. I just climbed a little bit, circled back around the pattern, and landed the airplane, and went down. But that split-second moment where that heart rate does go up, it could be paralyzing to some people if you don't fall back on the training to be able to assess the situation and do what you have to do to fly safely.
100%. Yeah, you said that's perfect. Exactly right. And then that just keeps growing. That heart rate spike that you handled perfectly, the more you get those heart rate spikes, or the more you have more training, the less it will spike, and the more you just focus on the task at hand, which is getting the airplane on the ground safely, no matter what the circumstance or how big the airplane is.
Big time. As a professional pilot, what are your training? What's your training like nowadays?
So my airline specifically qualifies for, I believe it's AQP. I believe it stands for Advanced Qualification Procedures or Proficiency. Basically what that means is every 9 months I'm required to go into the full motion simulator to do various different maneuvers, emergency procedures, different tasks. It's impossible to train for every event, right? I mean, we have an emergency checklist in our Boeing 767 that's about this thick. It's probably the same thickness as Harry Potter 4. So it's a pretty big book. And to go through every single item in that would take years, or maybe not years, but it would take months. It's not a feasible task to accomplish, to go over every single thing. So what the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, decided was like, hey, we have to be realistic about this. The men and women that are professional pilots that fly for these airlines, they have to be safe, but we have to understand that at the end of the day, these companies are a business. They have to make money. The pilots aren't making money for the company while they're in the simulator. They're making money for the airline that they fly for while they're flying cargo and passengers and the airplanes around. So with that being said, based on the training that we direct, you can check off like 4 or 5 different maneuvers that kind of encompass the entire checklist. What I mean by that is we don't practice an engine fire, an engine failure, an engine compressor stall, a rapid decompression, all every 6 or 9 months, depending if you're a first officer or a captain. You practice it like on a cycle. So like maybe I haven't done a rapid decompression, meaning you lose altitude at the high altitude in, we'll call it 2 years, right? But I did it 2 years ago, and that training, like we talked about, is still instilled in me. I know how to do it. I know where the procedure is. So if it does occur, I can perform the task. The procedures that I'm practicing on my next simulator session, for example, are like stalls. For people that know what stalls are, it has nothing to do with the engines. It has to do when there's no adequate airflow over the control surfaces, usually the wings, and the airplane just can't produce lift to fly, so it starts to fall. That's a hot topic right now in aviation. So the FAA has millions of data points that it gathers, and it says, hey, where are accidents and incidents trending? These are things that the public doesn't see, right? Because like you said earlier, incidents like this happen on a regular weekly basis, just no one hears about it because it might not be the hot topic, or no one will die, so no one hears about it. But if the FAA sees these data points, okay, all this is starting to happen, let's make sure that the pilots practice these stalls so that they're more prepared, since it's a higher trending rate right now in aviation. So yeah, really training all those months. We'll practice the big ones like an engine failure on takeoff, because the way that FAA looks at it, it goes, hey, what's the most critical time for a pilot to lose their engine? It's right on takeoff, right when you lift off the runway, right when you're about to lift off, your engine blows at 170 miles an hour, about 150 knots. That could cause major issues for the plane. the people on board, the pilots, all that stuff. So we can't train an engine failure at 5,000 feet, 10,000, every single altitude in every scenario. It would take forever. So we do the most critical one. The training department makes sure the pilots can handle the most critical one and say, okay, they're signed off, they're safe to fly, because if they can handle the most critical, then if it fails at 30,000 feet over the continental US, they'll have a million airports to choose from. They'll have over 45 minutes of time to figure it out. It's a lot easier situation to handle than if it happens at that time. So training always looks different. But for as far as it goes for airline pilots, it's very similar airline to airline and airplane to airplane. For someone who's flown a couple different type of airliners and been at different companies, it's pretty much the same as far as emergency procedures and making sure you can handle the most critical situations.
The most recent rollover, you've seen some of the footage right before it rolled over, right? It coming into land. I feel like you can tell what went wrong during that landing just by watching the video.
To an extent, like in my opinion, I feel like I can diagnose it better than half, or if not more, than the professional aviation experts on all these major networks. A lot of them have their pilot's license, but as you know, flying a Cirrus is different than flying a CRJ 700, 900, Boeing 767. Even just flying out of Lincoln Park Airport and whatever airport is different than flying in Toronto with gusty crosswinds, snow, and 76 people behind you as well. These are different scenarios. So to answer your question, yes. With that being said, I'm not the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. I'm not an investigative, I'm not on the investigation team where I know, okay, I see something right away and I remember it from history lessons, but I watch a lot of air disasters on the Smithsonian Channel, one of my favorite TV shows, and they basically just play history of aviation accidents throughout history. So I've learned a lot through that. Obviously, I have the experience of 15 years flying professionally. I've flown into that airport a few times. I've flown in conditions like that a few times, or a bunch of times. So yeah, I definitely feel like I have some expertise as far as knowledge goes of what could have possibly happened. I'll use this time to plug my YouTube, Pilot Pete Fly. I actually did a video on exactly that. And I'm very, very open and forward before I start those videos talking about incidents and especially accidents is, look, I don't know what happened. However, when I receive, no joke, hundreds of text messages, DMs, comments from people being like, what's going on? I'm terrified of flying. I know it can be somewhat sensitive to talk about accidents before the information comes out and is made public. With that being said, I believe the public, my parents, my girlfriend, my friends, my family, deserves some sort of response as soon as possible to let them know, hey, this is a potential of what could have happened. And by the way, this is very rare that this happens. Reassure them that flying is still the safest, even after these accidents and incidents have occurred in back-to-back scenarios. So I believe with the small platform I have that that ability, and I have that want, because I enjoy sharing aviation and spreading knowledge. Because I think the worst thing in life, not the worst thing in life, but one of the bad things for fear mongering is a lack of knowledge. So breaking things down of like, this is what could have happened. I've been in those situations before. I think it helps reassure people that, oh, okay, that makes sense. I can get on my flight tomorrow because Pilot Pete explained this pretty well, and I now understand why this could have happened.
So what are your thoughts?
When I made the video, I hadn't seen that one where the corporate pilot is holding short and filming. That one came out after I posted the video. There's a few things. The first one being, in no particular order, first one was when airplanes come into land, they're on a constant descent. But as you know, as a private pilot, right before you land, you arrest that descent, and you don't necessarily climb, but you slow that descent so that you can touch down with the most minimum vertical speed possible. You still want some vertical speed. I won't get into Boeing and Airbus saying you want a firm landing. But basically, instead of when you're coming into land, you're like this, you don't want to touch down on the runway like this. You want to arrest that descent and have it as slow as possible for a nice, safe, comfortable landing. Based on the footage, it looks like potentially that the descent wasn't arrested as much as it should have been. With that being said, I've landed on runways with 22 knot crosswinds. They were dealing with challenging conditions, not impossible, not out of the realm of kind of professional pilot standards. So as much of it that was a factor, I don't want people thinking, oh my gosh, there's a crosswind at my landing destination with snow, I don't want to go. Pilots can handle that. We're trained for that. We have experience flying in that, and the conditions were definitely challenging. With that, on top of that, not only did they have that crosswind, they also had blowing snow. So people who have driven cars before in that environment, it's hard to see. It's hard to judge your distance to the stop sign or the car in front of you. Visibility plays a major factor. Think about when you're driving on the highway when it's snowing at 70 miles an hour. I would say quadruple that, not based on just the speed. They're probably going about 120 to 140 knots, which is about 150 to 170 miles per hour. But they're also flying a machine that weighs 120,000 pounds. Like, it's a lot different than driving your Toyota Camry down the 405. No disrespect to Toyota Camrys. I drive a Toyota myself. But what I'm saying, it's a challenging task. So that on top of the conditions, on top of maybe experience, there's been a lot of rumors about who was flying the airplane. The first wave of information that came out on social media and TV was lack of experience, not that much time at the airline, whatever it may be. It's been debunked, I think, a lot of it. I don't know the exact flying hours or certificates held by the pilots in command and the pilot flying, the pilot monitoring. And then the third thing that not many people are talking about, and this happened, an aviation accident a couple years ago, I don't quote me on where and when, but the landing gear malfunctioned on landing. And it had a similar impact, disaster, accident. And all people were doing was hammering the pilots. Terrible landing. They effed up, they stink, their experience, this, that. NTSB came out 6 months, 8 months later and was like, the landing gear collapsed on landing. And everyone was like, oh, like that's not their fault, right? That was a mechanical issue. Planes are safe. They're the most well-maintained pieces of equipment, probably besides like space shuttles, I would imagine, in the world. They're so well-maintained. With that being said, they're still built by human beings and they malfunction and they break down just like your oil pressure instance that you experience. Like, you trust that airplane. You've flown it probably 100 times. You're going to fly it 100 times again. But it could happen. Things break. So not many people are talking about that. Now, do I know that's what happened? Again, no. But those are three big things. The weather playing a huge factor, the potential that the pilots didn't arrest the descent prior to touchdown, and then the possibility of a gear collapsing on landing.
Thank you for those insights. Typically when you're coming in on a descent to land, is it mainly autopilot controlled or is it pilot controlled?
It depends. So the airplane I fly, the Boeing 767, has the ability to auto land. With that being said, there's limitations to the auto land function, crosswind being one of them. If the crosswind is too much, the auto land you're not allowed to use auto land. The CRJ airplane that was flying by Delta Connection, Endeavor Air was the airline operating it. They do not have auto land on that airplane. So no, they can use the autopilot to fly the approach. So as someone who flies weekly, monthly basis, the norm at my level of flying a 767 is the automation will stay on usually until about a minute to 2 minutes from actual touchdown. So the pilots will use automation to intercept what we call an ILS, instrument landing system, the glide path, the glide slope, and the localizer. Basically, I know you know what it is, but an invisible beam that helps the airplanes dictate their up and down on the right path and left and right for the center line of the runway. So most pilots will leave the automation on to capture that invisible glide path, glide slope. And then usually around 1,000 feet above the ground, about 2 minutes from landing, or 500 feet, the pilots will click off the autopilot, maybe even click off the auto throttles. We actually have auto throttles too that control the speed. And then we'll do what's called hand flying and touchdown. I would say out of 100 landings I'll do in a year's time, 98 of them are manual, 2 of them are auto land. Just because we like to do it. It's fun. It's kind of what we train for. You said you have your private pilot's license. Flying that hour and a half was fun. Cruise was okay, but landing was a lot more fun. You know, it's what we train for. It's what we like to show off with, as far as trying to make it the best one possible. So yeah, automation is possible in certain jets, but for the most part, the actual physical landing, 98% of the time, is done by the pilots themselves.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your insights today, Pete. This was an awesome conversation. Tell our viewers how they can find you on the internet.
Awesome, Harry. Thanks for having me. I go by pilotpete.fly on Instagram and TikTok, and Pilot Pete Fly on YouTube. Like I said, I enjoy sharing my journey as a airline pilot, kind of show behind the scenes, whether it's on actual trips or layovers or different cities I travel to. And I love answering people's questions. So I always tell people, you shoot me a DM on Instagram, I'm going to see it, I'm going to get back to it, and happy to help all those who want to learn more about aviation.
Just that. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks for joining us today on Harry Handles It. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and found some valuable takeaways. If you're facing challenges in your own life or business, remember that you're not alone. Together, we can handle anything that comes our way. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you liked what you heard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and handling life with confidence.